Hello everyone, and welcome to this week's Motor Trade Radio podcast, powered by eBay Motors Group, with Philip Nothard and Curtis Hutchinson, bringing you all the chatter that matters.
Well, we're still getting used to that intro, aren't we, Curtis?
We are, yes. He's kind of taken over from us, hasn't he?
Yeah, and this is Curtis, by the way. He's not being replaced by an imposter. This is Curtis with man flu, isn't it, Curtis? You've been suffering a little bit this week.
Yeah, definitely. I woke up this morning sounding a bit like a Dalek, and I'll probably sound like a chatbot, actually.
We'll get on to that in a bit.
Yeah.
But, so hopefully we'll try and keep this a little bit short today, just to save Curtis's voice and strain in there. But again, a great lineup of headlines today, but first must really give a nod to the interviews, just in case you haven't managed to catch up with them. So we just reiterate, and we had Robert Forrester talking about his acquisition of the Helston Group and other things amongst that on episode 3. So do catch up on that one. Followed by Steve Young, who on episode 4 was talking about the Tesla announcement and the impact or not impact on the realignment of prices. And then finally, episode 6, if you've not caught that one, we caught with the usual monthly chat with Darren Martin from CAP HPI, who was talking about what had happened in the month of January, what to expect in the month of February, and more importantly, what's been happening around electric vehicle values. And we will give a shout out. We've got a very interesting, hopefully, interview coming up next week on your podcast feed with a group boss who is a friend of the show, and I'm sure you will all enjoy that one if we get that in place.
And a shout out from me to Auto Retail Network, because they've just published what is a really handy A to Z of which manufacturers are going to agency and those that aren't. So it basically lists all the manufacturers, so you can just scroll through and see what their announced plans are. And but bearing in mind that Volvo has just announced that it's postponed its switch to agency for 3 months, from April to June this year, it's actually really timely. So what we'll do is we'll pop a link for that in our newsletter on Monday morning.
Exactly. And, there's, if you're not aware of it, then Car Dealer are running a Car Dealer live at the British Car Museum over in Gaydon on the 9th of March. The lineup of speakers and panelists is fantastic. So if you've not checked that out, the tickets are going quick. So do try and get there. It looks to be a very full-packed event with lots of sort of fresh insight, white papers and research being shared on the day there. But whilst we're talking about Car Dealer Live, and we haven't got them in this week's stories, but check out Car Dealer, because they did another one of those investigations, but it was in conjunction with Motorway, but a great one there by James Baggett again, where they go out on the road and do a bit of filming. But also, we were talking about a chat box, and you and I were talking before the show, weren't we, Curtis, that they did a test. So there's this new system out there, this AI chat box that basically you can ask it questions and it'll answer you. And it's quite interesting. I've used it personally because I wanted to know what it would describe as agency, the agency model. And it does refer to...
Did it make sense of it, Phil? Did you understand it?
It did. It's actually quite fascinating, because it came up with an Amazon and booksellers and a case between the booksellers and Amazon. Of the whole thing, and it is interesting. But Car Dealer have done it, and it even asks questions around Kazoo and Cinch and things like that. But you do need to check that out on Car Dealer if you've not managed to see it, and the way this chat box has answered the questions that James Baggett posed to the AI technology.
I wonder if it's worth asking it about the cafe regulations, see if it will make sense of that.
Which cafe it refers to, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Well, yes, yeah, there's a point.
Motor Trade Radio podcast, powered by eBay Motors Group.
So headlines this week are from AM Online, Car Dealer, Motor Trader, Daily Telegraph and Reuters. We'll start in a minute with Vauxhall takes sector by surprise with introduction of 0% PCP offer. And curiously, that was on the same day that the Bank of England announced its latest interest rate rise. The VRA is urging greater investment in the reconditioning of older vehicles. New research suggests approved used schemes are not trusted by almost half of car buyers. This week's acquisition news sees Ray Chapman Motors buying Clive Brooks Volvo. Car makers signal end of shortages after 2 years of runaway prices. Stockbroker slashes Motorpoint's profit forecasts and warns of serious issues ahead. And finally, Geely plans to turn Coventry-based LEVC into an EV powerhouse.
Yeah, so and all these headlines and stories that we're going to be talking about today will be shared on the Motor Trade Radio newsletter on Monday mornings as usual. If you've not subscribed to that, then please do subscribe to that through our LinkedIn channels, and that you can get a link to the podcast and links to all the stories we're talking about. So, as Curtis has said there, on the week in which the Bank of England have raised the base rate from 3.5% to 4%, which was expected. Also, at the same time, Vauxhall have introduced 0% PCP offer, and this is that's been picked up by AM online, and this is for a really focused on this sort of March plate registration, isn't it? Because it's got a very short window that they've done this.
Yeah, it runs from the 1st of February to the 5th of April. And I don't think any of us were really expecting to see the return of 0% PCP deals, certainly not in the near term. So hats off to Vauxhall for doing this. And it's, I mean, what a great way to kickstart activity around the new plate change. And it does apply across the Vauxhall range. It's not limited models. And they do make a point of saying it includes EVs as well. And this is in addition to the plug and go offer that they already have on EVs, which covers 8-year battery warranty and breakdown covers. So it is a really good deal. It requires a minimum 30% deposit, but all of a sudden it makes a whole load of cars, especially EVs, affordable to new car buyers.
Yeah, and I think it's good. I mean, I've heard a couple of these by that some of the manufacturers are clearly worried about the rising interest rates and the challenges that causes in terms of that renewal of business within their brands. And, clearly we've got the advantage of still a reasonably strong used vehicle marketplace in terms of values. Obviously, we've got the challenges of interest rates and rising new car prices, but I think clearly initiatives like this is heavily focused on that renewal PCP business and being able to get those customers back into a new car at the end of their contract and potentially attract some conquest business as well into it. So a great initiative, and hopefully that they'll benefit from this and getting this first quarter off to a flying start, because we know the first quarter of the year is key for any business in terms of that profitability and registrations, and March clearly that point where Vauxhall will need a reasonably good strong start to the year.
Yeah, and the timing is spot on because, of course, Vauxhall's launching the all-new Astra, which includes the all-new electric models. And yeah, this is the eighth generation Astra, and it's actually the first one that's sharing a platform with a Stellantis brand car. So it'll be based on the same platform as the Peugeot 308. So I think this has all been neatly bundled in together, and the timing could be spot on potentially for Vauxhall.
And we'll obviously keep an eye on what impact it has when we get the registrations for March, how Vauxhall perform in that month. But sticking with AM Online, and they've shared a story: investment needed to recondition older used cars, and this has come from the VRA, but mainly focused on the fact that we've got this aging used vehicle park as a result of the lost volume over the last 3 years. We've got leasing and rental and defleet vehicles coming off. Defleet older, high mileage because of shortage of new cars in terms of that replacement. But it's actually what the sector is doing around that refurbishment and that preparation of those vehicles to get them up to a retail standard.
And I was interested when I saw this story because it was obviously based on a meeting that you chaired fairly recently over the last week or so. And it's really raising the question to both dealers and remarketers, isn't it?
It is, yeah. I mean, we had Darren Martin from Kappa HPI, Jonathan Butler from Geldards giving a sort of a legal, and it was quite interesting, some of the legal cases and how long those legal cases have stood for, and around obviously condition of vehicles and things like that. James Hopkins from Ask Consultancy, he started to share his views in terms of, the challenges of this used vehicle aging park and thinking about that reconditioning side of things. And then Lee Coomer from Assurant, who are part of the RAC dealer network, and thinking about these warranties and aftermarket. And it is starting to change because I saw some stats this week and on battery electric vehicles, and you and I have spoken about this before, Curtis, where this view that we get higher wear and tear on tyres on battery electric
Yes.
vehicles because of the weight and because of the torque on them. There's some evidence has come out this week from the SMMT and said that they've got data now that proves at an MOT stage on electric vehicles that a 23% increase for battery electric vehicles compared to their equivalent combustion engine vehicles on tyre wear. So it's actually evidence now that tyres are obviously, getting worn quicker and more on battery electric vehicles. But what I found interesting, they actually got stats and proved that suspension arms are actually failing more on battery electric vehicles than combustion engines. So again, potentially through torque and weight. So thinking about what this looks like in terms of that refurbishment of used vehicles, particularly on battery electric vehicles.
Yeah, interesting issue that, isn't it? And I think we've covered it on the podcast before about how the vehicles are charged. Whether they've been charged at home predominantly or in on the roads, motorway services or whatever, and the impact that has on the batteries, which is all feeding back into the used car sector. And what was the provenance of the vehicle?
Yeah, exactly. And you drive a battery electric vehicle. You have plug-in hybrid, don't you yourself? And it is that the difference between that vehicle that's been predominantly charged on the fast charges on the public network or trickle charged at home has a variant impact on that battery health. So again, we had Lee Coomer, as I said there, from Assurant, who are heavily trying to look at warranties for battery electric vehicles. And at the minute, they have got a warranty in the market that covers battery electric vehicles, but at the minute, it doesn't currently cover the battery itself, which I think they're looking at. So, again, big moves in that aftermarket space and predominantly focused on that vehicle remarketing sector.
And staying in the used car sector for the next story, which is from Car Dealer, the headline there is Approve Used Schemes Not Trusted by Close to Half of British Car Buyers, new research suggests. Well, the research is from What Car, and they've done a poll of just over 800 in-market buyers, and they found that 48.5% of those currently in the market for a used car do not believe dealers and manufacturers with approved used programs actually undertake thorough vehicle checks before handing the vehicle over. So it's pretty damning, this, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a difficult one to get your head around because we know that that used vehicle standards has significantly increased. We were just talking about there around that used aging vehicle park, and we know that through the pandemic and through the shortage of stock, some manufacturers have extended their approved schemes for higher mileage older vehicles to allow the dealers to be able to retail a bigger profile of stock through the approved scheme, and maybe that's having a bit of an impact on what's happening here. But yeah, it's quite damning that the way the consumers do see that and they're feeling towards those approved schemes because the franchise dealers do put a lot of effort and focus on those approved schemes.
Yeah, as indeed the manufacturers do as well. But the survey says that 54.4% of buyers who had previously bought on had actually bought on approved used schemes. So they had some detailed knowledge, and of those, 22%, so we're talking about 1 in 5, said they found faults in the vehicle which they believe should have been picked up by the manufacturer or dealer beforehand during the inspections. So that's really where this is coming from.
Yeah, I mean, it's. I'm sure there'll be a lot of dealers and OEMs reading this and trying to get their head around of if they've got any problems and what the concerns are within their own approved schemes going forward. And just moving over to Motor Trader now, and this is a friend of the show. We've had Clive Brook on a couple of times, but he's actually sold up. He's decided he's going pruning roses. We've talked about this a couple of times recently, haven't we, Curtis?
We have indeed. Yeah.
But he has actually, he's sold his Volvo dealerships to Ray Chapman Motors, who many of the listeners will know as an up and coming family-run business in the area. And Clive, after 40 years in the industry from a technician and 15 years running building Clive Brooks Volvo, has decided to retire. Now, we always question this, don't we, Curtis, when these industry leaders and people say they're retiring, and whether that is a permanent thing or whether it's just a short-term blip, and we will see a return. But yeah, I mean, it's a shame to see Clive go from the business, and just being in my area in terms of Bradford, Huddersfield is synonymous for Volvo in the area. Ray Chapman Motors will do a fantastic job. They've bought the entire business, they've bought the name, the premises, taken all the staff on. So clearly, Clive's felt it's the right move for the business to do that and to hand it over to somebody who's going to continue with what he's been building.
Yeah, and as a friend of the podcast, Clive is more than welcome to come back on the show and tell us all about what prompted it and what your plans are, and maybe talk us through some of those 40 years, because that's an incredible track record in the sector.
It is. It's fantastic. So, like you say, hopefully he'll take us up on that offer, and hopefully we'll get to speak to Clive a little bit more, and he can talk us through his career.
Yeah, and worth just pointing out that Ray Chapman Motors, that they'll actually double their representation with Volvo, because they operate in neighbouring Moulton and York, so that takes them up to 4 Volvo sites, which really gives them increased scale and standing with the Volvo brand.
You're listening to all the chatter that matters on Motor Trade Radio, powered by eBay Motors Group. This is your weekly one-stop shop for all the biggest car retailing headlines from across the media, available on demand wherever you are on your podcast feed.
Well, next headline is from the Daily Telegraph, and I'm not sure I totally subscribe to this story, but let's give it a crack anyway. So the headline is "Car makers signal end of shortages after 2 years of runaway prices." So the story is pretty much based on some comments made by Toyota at the beginning of the week. So Toyota, who I think were reconfirmed this week as being the world's biggest car maker. So it's ramping up production after 3 years of disruption, and adding to hopes of cheaper cars and shorter waiting times for drivers, according to the Daily Telegraph in this story. So Toyota, the world's top car producer, plans to actually surpass its pre-pandemic production levels this year, and this is based on better availability of chips, and as a result of this, it is ramping up production. And the piece does actually cover Volkswagen, saying fairly similar things about expecting to return to growth in the Chinese market, which is the world's largest car market and also a big source of car parts. So does this mean that everyone is feeling as confident as Toyota and Volkswagen? I don't think so. I think it's pretty much on a brand-by-brand basis, don't you, Phil?
It does seem to be. I think, watching some of the messaging and sentiment coming out of the NADA convention over in Dallas that was kind of back end of last week and the weekend, and they spent a lot of time in interviewing various OEMs and others at that sector, and there's a mixed message coming out now, and as you say, I think it's very much dependent on one, production capacity from those various OEMs, their access to the materials such as the semiconductors and others. I mean, Toyota are very well placed for getting access to that material, but other OEMs that don't necessarily sit in that marketplace have got sort of different challenges with that. Some of the OEMs are not planning to return to normal pre-pandemic production levels. They have different strategies in terms of lower volume, higher margin, retention, different model lineup, etc. And we know things coming out from Ford are slightly different. I think VW are fairly aligned that they're expecting production to recover, but other manufacturers are certainly not on that trajectory. So again, probably similar to what when Robert was on the show recently, Curtis, and we were talking to him about what his expectations are for the year because of the diversity of the brands that he represents. And he said it isn't just one message for all, it is very different messages for each of the brands. So, you have to talk about each brand, what their strategy is and what their access to materials are, of what that future will look like in terms of production recovery. Clearly, we are on a trajectory of return of volume, but what extent and how quick it will be and who will be the key leaders in that is still to be determined, I think.
And there's some interesting, there's an interesting caveat in Toyota's forecast, because it's saying that it has a ceiling this year of 10.6 million units, and that would compare to 9.1 million that it made during 2019. So, a significant increase there, but it has said that it may have to cut this target of 10.6 million if the chip shortage returns, and it said that may knock it down to 9.5 million. So we'll see what happens there, but it's a lot still hinges on the supply of chips.
Yeah, definitely. So again, one that we'll be watching very closely, and I'm sure that when we get to the sort of the end of the first quarter of the year, particularly in the UK and other markets, we'll get a flavour of who is getting recovery and who is a little bit slower out of the blocks than others. So, but some of the commentators are saying that it's 2024 before we'll see a true sign of recovery. Some of them still got some challenges around production and recovery there. So we'll keep a close eye on that.
So next story is from Car Dealer, and the headline is Stockbroker slashes used car supermarket Motorpoint's profit forecasts and warns of serious issues ahead. So this is really the response from Mike Allen at Zeus Capital to some announcements made by Motorpoint last week. So the piece that says that listed supermarket Motorpoint is overvalued when compared to quoted franchise dealer groups, and that's a direct quote from Mike Allen as issues a series of chilling warnings. So Mike goes on to say that as far as Zeus Capital are concerned, it has reduced its profit before tax forecast for Motorpoint for 2024 down from 7.1 million to £400,000. And Mike actually qualifies this by saying, we see strong competition and headwinds to profitability and cash generation for the foreseeable future, plus supply challenges in nearly new vehicles. We think Motorpoint continues to be relatively overvalued against quoted UK franchised motor retailers.
Yeah, and I suppose some people say to get where he's coming from with it. In terms of where it's been valued. I think you've got your flu here coming, Curtis.
You've just caught it, haven't you?
Not sure I didn't know we could catch that over the airwaves, but anyway. So yeah, I think the latest announcement coming out of Motorpoint, they did cite in terms of their performance, but actually the challenges that the revised position of battery electric vehicles has sort of caused them concern. I think that's general across the sector. Those that have been investing in battery electric vehicles and trying to get ahead of the market in terms of that sector, that some of those readjustments and challenges facing the electric vehicle sector has caused them concern. But it's, I suppose it's a difficult one, isn't it? Because at the end of the day, it is valued at what people believe it's worth, don't they? And
Yeah.
there's a question actually: is it that the rest of the sector is undervalued compared to Motorpoint's value? Not necessarily that Motorpoint is overvalued compared to some businesses, but yeah, it's probably not for us to have an independent view on, is it, Curtis?
Although that was something we touched on last week, wasn't it? This observation that some UK franchise businesses are undervalued, which is why they're so attractive to overseas investors at the moment. But I think you're right to pick up on the issue of electric cars because Motorpoint's announcement to the stock exchange reported falling used electric car prices and higher financing costs were having an impact on the business. And we've seen, because we've reported for the last 3 or 4 months about those falling values for EVs and the impact they're having on dealers.
Yeah, so again, it's going to we sort of clearly take a little bit of time to stabilise on that. But sticking with EVs, and our final story of today is the Reuters story, which is an exclusive to Reuters, talking about Geely's plans to turn maker of London black cabs into EV powerhouse. And this is quite interesting, really, in terms of how they're thinking of doing it. And this is I suppose, when people talk about EVs and how it will work, and it's using that platform, but to actually build different vehicles on the back of that platform, isn't it? Using that EV platform and then building, whether that's a Lotus or whether it's an LEVC London taxi is really where they're coming from with this one.
It is, yeah, and it does draw the parallels with the level of investment that Geely made into Lotus and how it has ramped up production, especially in China, of Lotus, and how this could actually be applied to Geely, a significant investment in the plant at Coventry and diversifying the vehicles that they're actually making, because at the moment they're famed for obviously the black London cab and a commercial vehicle, but they have the potential to produce other vehicles on their production lines there. So it's actually following on from our coverage last week of British Volt failing. This is actually the sort of welcome story that UK car production, certainly electric car production, could do with. So sort of big boost of confidence there for LEVC and the team there led by Chris Allen. And he actually goes on to say that they are exploring a range of commercial and passenger car models on a common electric platform, and it can lean on other group brands that already have EVs to move forward in a fast, agile way, because obviously Geely is closely related with a number of other brands that it owns, such as Volvo and Polestar.
Yeah, definitely, and I think it's great. The fact that these are in the UK as well is extreme positive there in terms of that production. We know that you mentioned British Volt there, and there's lots going on this week around British Volt. And I heard something where one of their previous owners had been removed from the business, and he's looking at buying. He's put a bid in for the business, and other things going on. So, again, there's a lot going on in the EV sector in general, but actually on the UK shores, isn't there, around this activity. And there's a lot of focus on making sure that the UK does get investment into battery electric vehicles and that manufacturing of batteries and battery electric vehicles here in the UK. So, yeah, it's going to be interesting watching this, and especially Geely, as you pointed out there, with the Volvo, the Lotus, and the Polestar. That sort of ambition growth alongside the London taxis.
Yeah, and they do seem to have the scale and the capacity, because at the moment LEVC currently makes around 3,000 taxis a year, but the implication is from the managing director there that that could be increased to 20,000 units at the plant.
Yeah, we'll keep an eye on this one, and it'll be interesting to see how this one grows. I mean, that's it this week, Curtis. Covered a few stories. I think we managed to get through without you losing your voice entirely. I'm pretty you'd be glad to put the headphones down and switch the mic off and go and get yourself a much-deserved glass of water, I suspect. But that's it. So again, just reiterate at the start there that these headlines will be available to read in more detail on the newsletter on Monday morning. And do tune into those podcast interviews that we mentioned earlier and listen out for the one next week, which we'll hopefully be able to bring to you exclusively one day next week.
Well, made it through without coughing or sneezing. So that is all for this week. Many thanks for joining us for all the chat that matters. Until next time, it's goodbye from me.
And it's goodbye from him.
You've been listening to Motor Trade Radio Podcast, powered by eBay Motors Group. We'll be sharing all the links from this week's headlines on Monday morning. So to make sure you receive them, just subscribe to the free newsletter on our LinkedIn page. Just search Motor Trade Radio Podcast.